Hey guys, welcome to your lesson on solving one-step equations. We're going to do some guided notes first, and then I'm going to do some modeling. So let's look at these two math sentences. We're going to be comparing and contrasting them. The first one is x plus 5, and then the second one is x plus 5 equals 20. Now they have some things in common. They both have the same variable, and they both have the number 5, but they're not the same. Okay, x plus 5 is considered an expression. Okay, with expressions, we evaluate expressions. And what that means is we substitute. So instead of using the variable x, I would replace it with a given value in order to be able to evaluate it. Okay, this math sentence is called an equation because it has an equal sign. When you have an equation, you have a specific answer, so you can solve, okay? And the goal of solving the equation is to find the value of the given variable. I want to know what x equals, okay? In math, specifically in algebra, we use variables to represent numbers, okay? And when we're solving this equation, we want to figure out what that number is, okay? And we do that by using inverse operations to isolate the variable. Now, this word isolate can sometimes be confusing. When you isolate something, what you're essentially doing is getting it by itself. Okay, you're isolating it. Okay, so we want to get x equals. That's what it means when we're solving. Okay, so let's take a closer look at inverse operations. Inverse operations are opposite operations that undo each other. Okay, so the inverse of addition is subtraction because they undo each other. Okay. The opposite of multiplication is division. And I want you guys to take a look at the green circle where it says multiply. Notice how I have a letter right next to a letter. Whenever you have a letter right next to another letter, that represents multiplication, okay? Notice how under that I have the letter A and the letter B, and they're inside parentheses down here. Oops, it'll appear again. They're inside parentheses. Parentheses are used to represent multiplication. You have to be able to recognize the operation that you're working with, okay? The opposite of multiply is divide. Okay, so they're inverses of each other. I want you guys to also notice how I'm using a fraction to represent division. Usually in algebra, we like to represent division with fractions, okay? So you guys have to get used to that. So let's take a look at these examples here. In my first example, I have x plus 2 equals 10. So I'm adding 2 here, okay? When you are given a one-step equation, you want to ask yourself, what is the inverse? What is the opposite here? How can I undo this? So the inverse of adding 2, the opposite of adding 2, would be subtraction. So I want you guys to take a look at my work here. Notice how I subtracted 2 on both sides of my equal sign, okay? It's important to keep things balanced. 2 minus 2 is 0, so then I can bring down my x. And then 10 minus 2 is 8. So I have solved my one-step equation. If I wanted to check my work, I can do that by substituting my answer into the original problem. And what substitution means is that instead of having an x there, I would replace it with an 8 to make sure that 8 plus 2 does give me 10. Okay? Second example, I have x minus 8 equals 15. I'm subtracting 8. Okay, so what is the inverse? What is the opposite? How can I undo this? So the inverse of subtracting 8 is addition. Okay, the opposite of subtracting 8 would be to add 8 on both sides. So I added 8 on both sides. I can bring down my x, and then 15 plus 8 is 23. All right, let's take a look at the third example. I have a number right next to a variable. Think about what operation does that represent, okay? If you have a number right next to a variable, that's multiplication. So if we are multiplying by -3, you have to ask yourself, what's the inverse? What's the opposite of multiplying by -3? The opposite would be to divide. It would be division. So I want you guys to take a look at my work here. The way that I represented division is I used a fraction, okay? So whatever number is next to your x, whatever coefficient you have there, that's what you're going to divide by. That's going to be your denominator. And we do that to both sides of the equal sign. -3 divided by -3 is 1, so I'm just left with x here. +12 divided by -3 would have given me -4. Okay, let's do the last problem. So in the last problem, I have x over 4. Do you guys see that? Equals 10. I have a fraction. Now we just said a fraction represents division. So what's the opposite of dividing by 4? The opposite would be multiplication. Okay? Notice how in my problem down there, I am dividing by 4. 4 is my denominator there. Okay? Now I'm going to be multiplying by 4. So notice how I'm using parentheses to represent that multiplication. What happens here is that 4 divided by 4 is just 1. They cancel each other out, basically. And then 10 times 4 is 40. So that would be my final answer. Okay, I want to show you guys a couple word problems because you are going to be asked to look at some word problems and then represent it with a one-step equation and solve, okay? So problem 1, Jackson has X marbles. If he adds 7 marbles to his pile, he will have a total of 10 marbles. What is the value of X? Okay, so we have to write an equation to represent the situation. Whenever you're given some type of word problem, it's important for you guys to underline or box or circle, whatever it is that you want to do to annotate the problem so that you can identify what's relevant. What was important for me to pay attention to, okay? One piece of information here that was important is that he added 7 marbles to his pile. So I know I'm going to be using addition in my equation. I also know that now he has a total of 10 marbles. Again, another key word for addition. What did he start off with? That's what you need to ask yourself. You know that you're adding 7 and you know that it has to equal 10. He started off with X marbles. So I have X plus 7 equals 10. Okay, so now I can solve. If I want to figure out what the value of X is, what he started off with, I have to do the inverse, the opposite. And the opposite of adding 7 is subtracting 7. So I subtracted 7 on both sides and I got 3. All right, second problem. Jose has X dollars. Okay, he has X dollars. That's what we're starting off with. After spending $80 on a skateboard, he will have $35 left. What is the value of X? Okay, so I've boxed in some important information. I know that he spent money. He was spending money. So think about this. Think about the context. When you're spending money, are you going to be gaining money? Are you going to be adding more to the money that you have? Or are you going to be subtracting? Okay. He was also left with $35. Think about that keyword left. So here in my equation, I'm going to be subtracting, okay? He started off with X dollars, with X amount of money, right? Then he did some spending, which means we're subtracting. He spent $80 and then he was left with 35. So think about what the inverse of subtracting 80 is. What is the opposite of subtraction? Addition. So I added 80 on both sides and I got 115, okay? All right, let's do 2 more problems really quickly. I think it's important for you guys to practice these types of problems because sometimes they could be tricky, okay? So here I have -4y equals 24. Notice how the number is right next to the letter. You have to be able to recognize that this is multiplication whenever you have a number right next to a letter. Think about what's the opposite of multiplying. What's the inverse of multiplication? It's division. And the way that we're going to represent this division is with a fraction. So notice how I put a line under my terms. And I'm going to be dividing by -4 because that's the coefficient. That's what's next to y. Remember, the goal is to get your variable by itself, to isolate the variable. So -4 divided by -4 is 1. So I'm left with y. And 24 divided by -4 is -6. And that's my final answer there. One more problem here, guys. We have a fraction. We have a divided by 9. When you have a fraction, you are dividing, okay? So the opposite of dividing by 9 would be to multiply by 9. And notice how I'm using parentheses to represent that multiplication. My final answer would be -45 because -5 times 9 is -45. On this side, the 9s divide into 1, okay? Some people say it cancels out. They just cancel out, okay? So you have a equals -45. All right, guys, The takeaway from today's lesson is that the goal of solving an equation is to isolate the variable using inverse operations. Remember, to isolate is to get that variable by itself. And these are your inverse operations. Good luck on your independent practice, whatever it is. You guys got this.